Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. It's James. With me episode is Lacey. You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a regular review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about breaking out all those magic items you have on your shelves. And now, it's time to get our gaming fixed.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. So today we are going to talk about whether or not you should drop some of these super awesome and rare magic items into your games, and whether or not it's worth it or it just clutters things up. But before we get to that, you may have noticed that kind of got a little behind on the episodes. We had some corona drama happen at our house, so everybody's all good, but we were just still plugging away and putting out episodes, so we had a little bit of a delay there. But as well, if you are a Kickstarter backer for Three Sisters, it'll be an update as far as where we're at in the production cycle of that. I know we were going to do an episode about mob action, but because of all the things that happened here this week at our house, didn't get to do the research that we wanted to, so that's going to be coming out next week. So, in the meantime, I guess, do you have an opinion? Which way do you fall on this? Do you like the idea of having like powerful artifacts and magic items in your games, or no?
Yeah, I think they're cool.
Okay. Right on. So, I guess just to set this up, where I'm coming from on this is that we buy, like, it made me realize I got the Octo Planetary Blade of Somnambulistic Resonance from the last LOTFP big set of books that got put out, and I also got the Deck of Weird Things. So I started a game with our three kids, and I thought, what if I just put both of these things in the game, because I got the books, and why not, right? But then it made me realize, how many books do I have on the shelf that have all kinds of weird and crazy, awesome, cool stuff in them, but then they never get used and never make it to the table, right? So then you're sort of like, it's cool to read them, but I'm not getting the books just to read them. Like, I like to play the games, you know? There's lots of games that we have that I haven't played, but in a perfect world, I would be playing every game that we buy, right? But that just isn't reality. So I guess, like, if you like having those things in the game, and on one hand, I totally agree, like, where is the sweet spot of where you're having the items and this kind of cool equipment in the game, but it's not just about, like, how do you manage to where it's not just, hey, I'm just the idiot with the cool stuff? Do you know what I'm saying? You know?
I think maybe like somewhere like the 5% chance, right? I feel like 10% steep, but so like somewhere in that 1 to 5% chance of getting something awesome.
So when they like have an encounter, you just roll random, decide if they get it, something or not? Either
that or, if it's a type of encounter where you're more likely to encounter something like that, although it's to kind of stumble upon it when you're not expecting it, especially if you don't have anybody with any spidey senses for that sort of thing.
Right.
So you just throw something in there and be like, maybe nobody ever picks it up, this rusty old glove that doesn't look like it does anything. But, right. So I realize that they're rare and unique items, but you're playing like,
rare and unique characters?
Yeah, exactly. You're playing rare and unique characters. Right. Like, you're not playing
Dave the Wheelwright from the small farm village.
Joe, the guy who cleans the privy. Like, that's not who you're playing.
Right. Or if it is, that's where you start, and then something crazy happens, and then you're off to the races, right?
No, you're more like, I myself am strange and unusual. You know what I mean?
Right. Like, yeah, I agree.
But I don't know. I was also trying to think of the last time I played a game where, when you say like rare and unique items, my first thought is Dungeons and Dragons, right? Because in the DMG, there's a table of things, and you can roll randomly. Yeah. And, I remember flipping through that and just like, oh, cool, right? And so, those are, the treasure tables are designed that way, so you can roll, and randomly you might end up with something super special. And so I guess that's where most of my experience with this comes from. Like, if you're playing, like we played a lot of Apocalypse World, but items aren't really like the big thing. They're like, there's some of them. Same thing with like World of Darkness. We're doing a vampire game. There's some interesting fiddly bits, and I gave you guys an option to pick one out of the equipment section in the back that would be cool for like hunting survival in the vampire world. But they're all still, they're like fancy schmancy, mundane things. Right. Sort of like, Blade or whatever. Like I have everything is a special bullet. There are no special things. There are only special bullets. But it's really, the fantasy world kind of is where most of that. But I think you could, I guess maybe the point I'm taking away from in this initial conversation is maybe I should just be more comfortable making my own cool items for games that aren't like that. Because certainly the science fiction world supports some pretty sweet things. I mean, the very concept of the lightsaber is strange and unusual, right? That's a unique item.
Right. Well, I think the lightsaber is a cool example of it, where I'm sure there's some boring Jedis that are out there or whatever, right, character-wise, but almost all the Jedis that are in any of the movies or stories or whatever, well, they all have a lightsaber, but that's just the thing that they have. It's not like that's the star of the moment. Do you know what I'm saying? So like when Qui-Gon or Darth Maul, or they have, like they're doing their thing. Well, yeah, they've got cool lightsabers, but that's not what gives them the awe and majesty of who they are. It's not the idiot with the lightsaber. It's, oh, that's Qui-Gon or whoever, and that's where that sweet spot is, I feel like, where sure, you can give out the hand of Vecna or whatever artifact you want to give out, right? But you got to make sure that, the game is about the characters and not the item. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. You don't want to have the fantasy version of a juggler running around with a vorpal sword. Like, why did you do this?
Why does my game just become?
Or maybe you do. Maybe. Hey, I don't know.
Whatever works at your table, right? I guess that's what we always say. Know your audience, right? So I guess if that's your jam, go hard in the paint and do it all the way. But
so have you incorporated any awesome items in a non-fantasy setting that come abundantly to mind? I guess maybe in Trail of Cthulhu or Call of Cthulhu, there's a lot of fantastical items, but they all make you crazy and probably should not be touched or opened.
Right. So
it's pretty much a standard.
Well, my mind was 100% in the D&D and LOTFP vein, right, when we first started talking about this. But then as soon as you said something about sci-fi and that kind of stuff and World of Darkness, okay, cool. So I have a couple thoughts, right? So Call of Cthulhu, I'm right there with you. There are loads of cool books and tomes and spells,
none of which should be touched.
Items. But I like that, though. And that's the thing, is it's like one of my favorite things in Call of Cthulhu style games, whether it's Trail of Cthulhu or Call of Cthulhu or whatever version of it you're playing, that there's always a spell or a forbidden tome turning up that has spells and that kind of stuff in it, right? It's part of the premise of the game, right? But it's not like there's so many of them that you're drowning in. Do you know what I'm saying? There's it makes them special, but then each time you play a new game, now there's a new spell here. So there's enough of them to where you usually don't get the same one. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But it still makes them cool and unique and fun to play with. And there's that risk of oh, how far do I, it's sort of like betting, right? Did I push too far? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So. It's sort of like giving out only rare items that have an ego.
Yeah. So I guess I've given out spells and that kind of stuff in a Trail of Cthulhu games, right? And then for World of Darkness, I've done some kind of custom items before with I did the Antonius Vault, which is this weird artifact, and it sort of became a running thing that kind of had a link between a couple different games that was fun and cool. And that was even more fun because then you got to see the history of this thing build, because I had it in a Dark Ages game and then I also had it in a modern game. So you got to, where did this come from? Is my old character's soul inside the cup now? You know what I mean? There's some cool moments there.
I've done some in Fate. Items are super easy to create in that system, which is cool. Yeah. So you just well, this is what I would like the sword to do. And it's almost like creating a stunt. I had a special item that I gave you guys that was sort of a la Coraline. It was a basically a viewfinder. You could look through and it would show you, the hidden truth of something.
Yeah. Well, Fate is really easy because then you just sort of whatever the powers you want to have for the aspect, which I guess in reality, it would be the same for anything else as well. But the mechanics of it for what it actually does
are super simple. Yeah,
much more simple.
And I think that's a lot of times what is intimidating in creating your own anything for a system is why I don't want to make it too broken, or I don't want it to end up being lame because I didn't quite understand mechanics and probability and what I was doing with it.
Fate is super easy, and so is PBTA. So any PBTA game, a +1 would be a significant thing. +2 would be holy cow, and 3 would be Excalibur, right? So that's pretty clean mechanically, and you could just say it's +1 to whatever. What?
I'm just thinking about Monty Python again. Just because some harlot hands you a
sultry
sword
tart or something like that.
I can't remember.
Gave you a sword, yeah. But
it's not a basis for a system of government.
So, but in that case, it's easy to do because it's just +1 to whatever it is, right? And you could say it's +1 in these situations or +1 to, or whatever stat you wanted to go with. That's pretty straightforward. And then D&D wise, if it's a D20 game, if for every +1, basically just giving you a +5% 5% to whatever it is. So it's, pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little more difficult is when you're like damage modifiers and that kind of stuff. Because what is a significant benefit, like if it does plus a d6 damage, well, at first level, that's pretty fatal. But, by 6th level, 7th level, it's sort of like, whatever, okay,
I don't really need this anymore.
Okay, it was kind of, it's like the first, I don't know, cool car you had or whatever. Like, oh yeah, I remember that one. That was cool. Yeah, I ended up selling that.
But I like the idea of a collector too, in Guardians of the Galaxy, they have the collector. And that's sort of like what, isn't that basically like Xanthar's Guide to Everything is kind of.
Oh, is that what he is? Is he like a collector?
I thought so. I haven't really read the book, but I've just sort of seen it and mentioned.
I like the idea of it. It's cool, but so I guess on one hand, if you're talking like the D&D style where you're like rolling off charts to see what the treasure could be, I'm a big fan of if they're going to have something, you probably should give it because that would influence the encounter and they're more likely to be like, oh, I definitely want that sword. He cut the crap out of me with that sword, right? Mm-hmm. Or whatever it is. And then, so for the game with the Deck of Weird Things and the Octo Planetary Blade, what I did is the 3 characters started in like a wizard's seclusium, right? So that's one of the books from LTFP, but like it's sort of like this extra dimensional space that exists outside of time where a wizard will retire to do loads of research outside of time and plane, right? So they wake up and they're in this thing and basically the magic has gotten faded, so it's sort of come back. It's like coming back into the real world, right? And they were captured to be used as experiments there, right? So they're kind of like looking through this little wizard, safe house thing, whatever. And that's where they found a couple different items or whatever. And so that in those cases, I have these books. I'm going to put them in there because I want to see what they do, right? And see how much of a disaster 3 kids can cause with a deck of many things and a sword that like has relationships to all 8 planets or whatever, it's just insane. So on one hand, it's more of an experiment to see what's going to happen with them so I can decide whether I want to bring them into other games that we have because like no amount of ridiculousness bothers them at all. Doesn't matter. Like continuity, yeah, they have some idea of continuity, but like no matter how ridiculous it gets, they don't even care. So it's a fun way to sort of test things, I guess, but it's in that case, those were like specific named objects. It wasn't something that was just like a sword +1, right? Because I think those items are pretty boring. Even if you have like a +5 sword.
The mastercraft thing, right? Yeah. Like they were nice to have, but they're not exceedingly special. Like you could buy that level of craftsmanship. Yeah, it's not magical, right, or rare necessarily.
It's like I want my items that are in this case, I want them to have like name, right? So that, people know the names of different, like, well, Excalibur. If you say Excalibur, well, probably everybody knows what that is, right? If you like the lamp from like the genie lamp thing, the oil lamp, right? From 1001 Arabian Nights, right? Everybody knows what that is, right? So even if
what is it? Grimnir? The hammer.
Grimnir, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Or no.
That's not right.
Grimnir is the other one. That's the spear, I think. I'm stuck into it, but that's Half-Life. That's a Rammstein song. Mjolnir.
That's it. Something near.
Wow. I did reach way deep back in there to find that one. But yeah, exactly. They're like, those are the, Stormbringer, Captain America's shield. Like, the people already knows what these things are.
Norse mythology, especially, is such a cool thing for unique items because of, like, the race of the dwarves, like, in that setting. And they're master craftsmen that can make anything. And there's, the god, too. Like, the blacksmith god. I can't think of his name right now, but... and him too, and in their mythology they have a contest between like him and the dwarves to see who can manufacture the greatest thing. Well, he is, I think it is the god and dwarves. Well, there was 2 dwarves involved though, but I think they're like brothers or something, and like one pumps the bellows for the other. Anyways, but so that's a cool universe that's just full of, it's like every item is a unique. There are no mundane items. Right.
If there's a mundane item, they don't mention it,
which is cool.
Yeah. Well, no, but I think it's interesting that way because then they have this sort of history that everyone might know, right? And then especially if you have players, it's even easier now because of like Thor being popular with Marvel or whatever, right? So even if they don't have a knowledge of Norse mythology, you could say Mjolnir, and there's a decent chance.
There's that. Well, and then just the idea of scions, right? And like Percy Jackson and some movies like that have become more popular in those storylines for kids. There's the whole series of like Magnus Chase or something like that. But, things like the Golden Fleece, there's those more common items, common mythological items that people, not that they're common, but that people have heard of.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying. And I almost think something that is like that is even cooler to incorporate in a game. game. Like maybe you don't ever get it or get your hands on it, but the idea that it's there and you know about it and you on a meta level know what it is and what it does.
Right. Well, that, and then sometimes like some of them aren't necessarily the most useful things practically, right? So like Mjolnir, yeah, in a fantasy game, practically it is about as useful as it's going to get, right? The Golden Fleece, maybe not, right? Because it's, kind of a one-trick pony, I guess, you know what I'm saying, And so, but at the same time, if you have it and people know you have it, loads of people are going to be coming after it, right? All that kind of stuff. So
what about in your historical fiction settings or even like historical fiction, low magic? What about like saintly items? Like John the Baptist's ninth toe or whatever.
Well, the 7 heads of John the Baptist is one where I immediately go to. I've had several games, things together in my head. So I know I've had several World of Darkness games where whether they were just regular mortals, right? Or whether people were inquisitors and they had saintly relics, right? And they were, there were rules inside of that for, mechanically true faith and all that kind of stuff. So I've had loads of those, and those have been very interesting because in those kind of games sort of so underpowered anyway. You have to have something, besides really crafty players, they need something else to sort of give them a trump card, that what it usually becomes, we have to be crafty. This is the tool we have. How do we make this tool fix this job that we're on right now is what it sort of turns into sometimes, which is interesting to see. But then at the same time, they begin to rely on it too much. And you throw challenges at them where there's no clear use for it at all. And they have to find a way to now, time to go back to how I used to do things before we got this relic, right? And, kind of back and forth. So yeah, I've done that there. And then I was actually just thinking about 7th Sea.
Oh, that's the very next thing I was keeping in my mind for when you were done. Yeah. Pirates, because there's such a cool pool of superstition there that it kind of, lends itself to that bigger than life item.
Oh yeah. With 7th Sea, there's the Cyrnith, right? Which is like Atlantis essentially, right? And I have done all kinds of stuff with that because I used to have, before the new edition of 7th Sea came out, I used to run loads and loads of 7th Sea. So I took a couple different perspectives on it. And this is where I think it's kind of interesting. At one level, I made the Cyrnith sort of like super technology. Like they had clockwork technology that worked on a power that they just didn't understand. And so they had like sort of like mechanical automatons that were all clockwork and gearwork and stuff.
Like Doctor Who.
Yeah. It was really cool and fun. And then we also had a more mythical side of it to where there was like more magic, like traditional Atlantis, powered magic stuff or whatever. And so in those cases, though, I always love dropping in a couple. So like if you have a party of 5 people, right, that are in your 7th Sea game, I always like dropping in like 1 or 2 sort of mythical items because then it's not everybody has one, right? So then it's like this shared property that the group has, right? And who can keep it safe and all this kind of stuff. And then usually I try to make them to where they're pretty far apart in what they do. So one might be more combat effective and the other one is more like social, mental, interactive effective, right? And then once the players start to use it more in that world, those things are literally items of legend. So then it attracts people either to come steal it, to come be their follower, to come do whatever, which inherently brings along its own set of baggage with it,
Like the idea of like knucklebone gambling dice, like that could be a cool thing. The first thing that came to my mind though is Pirates of the Caribbean, Captain Jack's compass.
Compass, yeah.
That would be a pretty sweet, unique item.
Oh yeah.
And that's not, it's very thematic, but it's not overly broken, and it's an excellent plot catalyst.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, that's the Pirates of the Caribbean movies are great examples of sort of super thematic items.
The Aztec gold.
Yeah.
The curse there is really great. The pieces of 8 are pretty hilarious in that, but symbolically significant.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting too because there's all this mythology behind it, and sometimes you realize, oh wait, that's what it is. Like, really? It's a great moment in the movie when all the I think it's the character who sort of like Smee, basically, with the mutton chops, and he's like, well, it's just sort of what they had laying around at the time.
We're broke.
So,
but yeah, any of those would be cool. Musical instruments are always a good one too. Something that weird or interesting that happens when we play it. Legend.
Oh, with the flute.
The flute.
Yeah.
And you see that in Mario too, right? With the whistle.
Yeah. Musical items are interesting because there's lots and lots of them throughout time, whether it's just a harp or a drum or whatever, but there are loads and loads of all this mythology that go along with magical musical items. But very rarely do they seem like they ever really get brought into a game. And if they do, it's a game where there's a bard. And so it's probably like a really big untapped resource, because what if you're giving...
And it's such a strong connection in just stories too. I mean, think about Jack and the Beanstalk, play the harp that plays to keep the giant asleep. Think of, you basically see the exact same thing in Harry Potter, right? Where the Cerberus is there, the three-headed dog, and, they have to play music to lull it to sleep. And, it's just over and over again, that sort of thing is to the story Abayoyo. Plays music for the giant to lure him away from the town so that he doesn't eat all the people.
The name. Interesting. Right on. But no, you're 100% right. Like, there's all kinds of them throughout, because music is present in every culture, basically, right? So there's always these stories of, super mythical or inspired instruments or whatever. So, or even just the idea of an actual muse. Like, that's another interesting thing, is that there's an actual, like, the muse is an actual embodied person, or, for elf or whatever your mythology is or whatever. And it's kind of, like, to just have that person physically there, inspires you to do great things or whatever, Cool. But the instrument one is interesting because, like, especially in a D&D game. I don't remember any either. But, like...
I was remembering from the Sandman graphic novel because he captures her, just the blonde hair, but I'm not placing her name right this moment.
The long serrated though. Shoot, that would be where you dive right there. Sandman? Holy cow. But with the musical instrument thing, though, that's a lot of skills that no one ever buys unless they're a bard, right? But how many people that play an instrument, it's going to be kind of like shoehorning things, right? But aren't a professional musician, right? Because if you're a bard, essentially, it's kind of what you would be, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, how many people do you know that actually have some musical talent with something, but that's not what they do at all,
Well, and picture you're on the traveling back in the day. What you do? Yeah. You probably, like, sang, played an instrument, played some cards, rolled some dice, read a book, journaled.
Fart jokes and cards only go so far, right?
As far as entertainment goes, kind of limited. No smartphones, not watching no TV.
For sure.
Storytelling and music. That's
tapped kind of in. There's a lot.
I think there's something to be said for incredibly unwieldy, unique items too.
Oh, right.
Right, like everybody just thinks like sword or like ring. Mm-hmm. Like, what about a cooking pot? Like, here's 30 pounds you have to carry around, but it's super useful, and like you put a water and a rock in it, like stone soup style, and it makes you food.
Right.
There you go. Or like stregonona, the magic cooking pot that makes the spaghetti when you tell it the right word.
Well, I was just thinking other adventures. There's a bunch of the LOTFP adventures that have harpsichords in them because of the time period, or some version of a harpsichord. And if you play certain songs on them, certain effects happen, right? Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, they're usually like it's Paganini's Ninth or something. Like, it's all things that people know. Or, and I think in one of them, there's like a metal song or something that sets off or whatever. I can't remember what it is. But either way, it'd be interesting to see, like, you have to you never really know the full potential of the item, because then it's a matter of sort of like trying quite literally pluck out the right notes.
It's a little bit scary too, right? It's almost like the Hellraiser puzzle box, right? I don't know exactly what this is going to do. And if I move, if I do it this way rather than, like, it's dangerous to experiment with.
Well, what about like
but also intriguing.
Oh man, because you could totally do something with like you're talking about like the saintly items, right? So what if you found Gabriel's horn, right? Because he's supposed to blow the horn at the end of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So what if you found this magic, horn or trumpet or whatever, right? Bugle, and it does all kinds of stuff.
Use only.
No. It does all kinds of cool stuff. But then if you play the wrong song on it or the wrong set of notes, it actually cues Armageddon, right? Like, everybody's sort of like, wait a minute, what? Like,
isn't there a buzz sound? Are those locusts?
You're just like you play it, and I just have this vision of like, if it's a movie, like the cutaway scene to like the angelic hosts and the demons or whatever. They're like not ready, and they're like, what? What? Like sitting around playing cards or whatever they do in the angel break room. Do you know what I mean?
There's Joshua too, right? Jericho. He plays the horn and brings down the walls of Jericho.
Yep. So I think there's some cool potential there. There's really easy things to draw from, to pull in.
It'd be hilarious coincidence though, right? Sorry, that's off topic. But if you're like, he just happens to be playing and something crumbled, and you're like, it was me.
Right.
Like, what?
That could be really fun.
You just happened to quake right after you finished your song.
Right? Was that you?
Yes.
I'm going to go with it totally was. I'm totally taking credit for that.
50 bar.
Right. Well then, so I guess on one hand, I'm 100% okay with this. I think it's a lot of fun to bring into. It can add a lot to it, right? At the same time, you got to pay attention to the power creep because you don't want to giving out items, right? But because then it becomes where I have this like bandolier of magic that I'm going to, okay, what's the encounter? Okay, so I take out the, pouch number 2, whatever it is.
You become Beetle traveling to special items for sale.
But
No, I agree. There's definitely an oversaturation point. You can't make every item that you give out. So I don't know. Somewhere, like I said, the 1 to 5% range, maybe, depending on projected longevity of your game.
Well, and then something else that I have done is that, and it's kind of a trope in a lot of video games where the first sword that you get continues to get more powerful as you go on through the game, right? And so I have done things where the characters had a special item or whatever it was at the start of the game, and they discovered more things about it as time went. Sort of I don't know what the unlocked powers, which is similar to the magic instrument, kind of thing that we're talking about before. Mm-hmm. But because it also keeps fresh, because they always have something to pursue, whether it's research about whatever the thing is they have or whatever. So, but
I guess that's kind of why the deck of many things is cool too, because it's for use it up.
It's expendable, I guess.
Yeah, expendable. It's finite, right? Sort of like when you would get a staff or whatever, 20 charges or whatever, and that kind of
here's what makes me crazy.
But when you're done, you still have a stick, so it's not like you lose.
But here's my problem with that, and this is just how I go about doing things. My problem with this is I get this cool wand, right? And then I'm like, all right, cool, I've got this wand of magic missiles, right? But I never use it till I've used all my spells, and it's it's sort of like my holdout pistol, right? And it starts, we'll say, I get it, and it's got 40 charges. I hardly ever use any of them because I want to save it for the most dire of circumstances.
Well, it seems silly too, right? Like, you had a lightning rod, there's no way to recharge it. You can't just leave it tied to the top of a tree during a storm.
Right.
I think that's silly. But no, the deck idea I do like. I like the idea of a one-use thing. You like a potion. You drink this, and this is what happens. And then I think that's neat. Or a book with spells, but maybe when you read the spell, it disappears. That would be pretty cool. I don't know.
I go back and forth, but I think it's just me, because I'm always trying to hold out for the moment to use it. Do you know what I'm saying? But then I've also had I had this wand of magic missiles, and now I got a second wand, so now the thing is it's trash, so we're just gonna use it up.
I always like the non-combat things too. I think are just more interesting, right? You're like, I found a magical water skin. It's always full. Yes, I can chop heads off with almost anything, but water, that's a commodity.
Well, depending on the game you're in, if you're playing in a game where you're in Dune, where there is quite literally no water,
right?
It's basically just a money printing machine. Or if you're in Dark Sun, which is another sort of arid desert, worlds of breaking climate, or Veins of the Earth or something, there's a lot of potential for those more thematic items where it gets a lot cooler. And then at the same time,
like in Harry Potter, right? How much more interesting is the pensive than the sword of Gryffindor? I'm like, okay, it's a sword, it's whatever. That's the thing he pulls his memories out of, and you can look back on him that's really cool.
No, I agree. That's
not real portable, but really cool.
Right. Or the time turner.
Yeah, the time turner, wicked awesome. I don't know. Anyway.
No, you're 100% right, because I feel like
even the sorting hat is cooler than the sword because it's got a personality, right?
Well, the weapons are kind of the gimme. You know what I'm saying? It's okay, well, it's a sword, but it just cuts. Well, it's kind of boring. You know what I'm saying?
What do you think about unique components, or dragon scales, or basilisk fang, or things like that? Does that fall in a different category, or
kind of? I guess maybe I've always
just win those only through conquest.
Well, I like that because I used to have I had a D&D character that was my expertise was in magic components and monster ecology, so I harvested everything. So it was cool, we killed these whatever's cool, so I'm going to dissect them now because this gallbladder is worth 10 gold, and this on down the line, the bile, gotta harvest the bile, all that kind of stuff. So it was fun, it was different, and for the most part I wasn't concerned about anything because I made my money off of the carcasses. You take their trinkets where the real gold is. Who cares? And that was really fun. But yeah, it's I bring that one back a little bit because it was interesting and fun to do. There were some characters that had a real problem with me just dissecting it. Okay, I'm gonna harvest or whatever. You're digging in its brains. Well, I know. What else?
If it was just like Zelda and it fell apart into the pieces I needed, we wouldn't have to do this. That's the goblin's magical attribute. You cut it and then poof, goblin guts and tooth. Well, that was handy.
Right. It's an awful stinky bag you have there full of goblin intestines. Yeah. But I think the component thing is fun because it's a big part of all of the stuff, because just like in the Norse story with Loki and the competition to make where they make, I think it's when they make what's her name's golden hair, and so they needed something. There was items that they need to be able to craft the things, which was, so there's always that quest to go get the, like you said, basilisk or whatever.
Well, and have fought loads of creatures in a fantasy setting and even wizards and things like that. And I don't think I've ever found like random spell components,
right?
Which I feel like you probably should, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're killing a wizard, they probably add things on them to cast spells. I don't know.
Well, we were
trophies claimed from other creatures if it's a fighter.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I just maybe random treasure finds should be more interesting. Like,
well, I think there's a lot of specifically
except
OSR
for
books.
Borg, you can find a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, well, that's where I was going to go. Is like even if you're just playing D&D, but books like Mork Borg and lots of LTFP books have really cool, like I Search the Body tables in them that have all kinds of weird stuff. So like the first, when you're rolling percentile, the first like 1 through whatever it is 30 is just that many silver pieces, and then after that it's all kinds of, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, Mork Borg does have a table stuff. Although they did just put out on the Mork Cult a 100 table with 100 different weird trinkets to find, sort of like Mothership style with like, patch, but it's Mork Borg, so it's all super metal. So yeah, lots of right. So I think we will wrap this one up here. So lots of fun. There's tons and tons of OSR books that have lots of magic items with personality. So if your only experiences with them out of like the DMG, right? There's lots of much more interesting items out there. So just dig in. There's some of them are actually in the D&D books or whatever, but there's lots of OSR books that have crazy cool items with personality, awesomeness.
I just thought of a really cool item idea, but I want to tell you about it because I think I might incorporate it into one of my games and just really mess with you guys.
Well, I'm intrigued and bummed and happy to not know about it all at the same time. But right on. Yeah, I hear you. I bet sometimes we're talking about something, I'm like, oh, should I say this or should I just hold this one back? I'll probably forget. Probably say it. So there's lots of books out there that have all kinds of cool stuff in them. So go out there, expand the systems and books that you're looking at, because there's always cool things in different from different writers and different settings and different games. So just because it's not necessarily 4.5e or 4.5 Fate or whatever the version of whatever role-playing your game you're playing is, there's always inspiration to be found in all kinds of different books. So, and if nothing else, Neil Gaiman's Norse Gods, we mentioned before, the stories in there, he's got a really cool story where he crafted in the Neil Gaiman kind of way all the Norse myths or whatever, and they're really, really good, and there's some good inspiration for mythical items in there. So it's worth a look if you need some inspiration. Well, if you've had an awesome item or something that you've created with cool personality that you'd like to share with us and maybe get a shout out here, you can hit us up at Twitter at JustMoreFix, or hop onto our Facebook group and let us know over there, or on our Patreon, or you can email me, James at JustMoreFix. We'd love to hear from you, because I've always find it interesting. There's lots and lots of cool stories, but magic items sort of like are in that crux of like, here's a couple cool paragraphs of something, and it's like bam, right there in your face, and they can have a lot of personality and potential for hooks and games. So hit us up and let us know. As you know, we're a member of the Gunna Geek Network, so you can check out all the other geek content over at GunnaGeekNetwork.com. If you like what we do at Just More Fix, you can head over to patreon.com/JustMoreFix and support us over there and get access to our raw audio feeds and early access to our shows, as well as our zine and PDF or print format. And join the awesome ranks of our Patreon supporters like Timothy Barra, Alistair H., Alan White, Hector Trelane, Tiziano Furlano, Paul Hubbard, and the OG Toddleson. I think that'll do it for us this week, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetent.com. You can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix, or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.